My name is Meron, and this is A Game of Two Halves, a football analysis channel that aims to bridge the gap between amateurs and the professionals through analysis breakdowns, data deep dives, and industry insights. As a former head of player analysis at a data analytics company, my specialization is in scouting and player assessments, as well as opposition scouting, and using data to aid the scouting process as well. So today I'll be focusing on the top 3 mistakes that football clubs make when they sign a player. How many times have we seen a club buy a player and the football community, the fans, the pundits, sort of the club itself, all rate the player, all think it's going to be a great signing, but for some reason it does not work out. Why is that? So the first mistake that I think clubs make is about the wrong style of play. So what do I mean by that? So that is when a player is brought in to play in a system that does not either A, highlight their strengths, or B, probably does even worse and highlights their weaknesses. So for example, it could be that a player is brought in to play in a system that is a slow build up, short passing, playing through the thirds, patient style of play, not too much crossing from deep or wide areas, more cutbacks through balls, sort of the Man City prototype, or the Guardiola prototype, should we say. And the other type could be sort of the transitions, or direct pieces of play, more aerial balls to the striker, or switches of play, trying to bypass the midfield. These are different styles that a player can be brought into play. But it's important that the club knows what they want from the player and how they're going to fit into that specific system. Now, this is not just from an attacking sort of standpoint. This could be from a defensive standpoint. How high is the defensive line playing? That might be something that is quite a key trait to look for from the team style, because, sitting in a deep defense where you have bodies around you, sort of compact from the midfield, hard to get through the thirds, and you're probably dealing with more, crosses, heading it away, clearances. It's easier to track a man because it's usually a one-on-one relationship with not much space to attack him behind. These are the kind of things that you have to look out for, because if you buy a player that doesn't fit that certain style, so you buy a player that likes to play in a deep defensive line, but you have a high defensive line, that could be a problem in the future, in terms of adapting to that, or they don't have the physical characteristics or player traits to adapt to that. And one example of that, I believe, is Harry Maguire. When it was a deep defense at Leicester, he thrived. He was able to maybe deal with the crosses, head things away, win his aerial duels, bit of comfort around him in terms of people covering him behind. Whereas in these top clubs where they play a bit more of a high defensive line, this is one where you need a bit more of a different physical characteristic to deal with that style of play. So playing in a deep line versus a high line could be a big problem for someone like Harry Maguire, who lacked the physical characteristics to be able to deal with a high line. You need to have a certain level of agility, reading of the game, pace once the run starts. I mean, you can see he wasn't too bad at seeing the run, but he couldn't turn or get up to speed quick enough to actually track the run to a sufficient level. Now, you could say, and a lot of managers, this is a fair point, that once a player comes in, we know his strengths, we know his weaknesses, we think we can get something out of his strengths, but the weaknesses is something we can work on. Now, I think there has to be some sort of cut-off point where the weakness is detrimental to the style of play that we're trying to play. So this leads me on to the next point, and the second point of why clubs fail when signing players is the quality of the manager. Now, why is the quality of the manager such an important point? So for me, the quality of the manager and the hiring a good manager is probably one of the most important things that a club can do. Why is that? Because a good manager always has a good plan, a clear plan that is easily translatable to the players. The players know what they're doing week in, week out, not just as a basic sort of, we're playing short, we're playing through the thirds, playing patient, but the patterns of play that they attempt to play, what they want from different roles on the pitch. As a right winger, if I know that there's no point in me running in behind because he wants me to get into feet and dribble at the player, the fullback, or if I'm supposed to be running in behind and someone will find me because that's how we're designed to play, then it becomes far easier for a new signing to fit in seamlessly once they get training under their belt. However, when a coach does not have that level of detail or is not able to translate it to the players in a certain type of way, you get a sort of situation where you buy players that sort of fit a mold, but because the manager doesn't know exactly what he wants from a position, it's hard for the scouting department to sign a player that always works out. They're going off maybe scraps of information on, a certain level of pace or movement they might want from a player. But it's better when the scouting department and the manager are able to work in tandem to know what they want from a certain position they're scouting. And something I like to call the Manchester United effect is when a club buys a player, the next player, another player for the same position, different positions, and they all seem to not work, or they don't have the same level of impact that the fans expected or the club expected. And that sort of then starts to lead towards, well, is it the players or is it the environment or the coach? Sometimes, after you see numerous bad signings or bad signings, they're always quality players to an extent. There's always a certain strength that they showed at their previous club that the new manager saw or the scouting department saw, but for some reason they don't work out with the club. And when a manager doesn't know exactly what they want from the player, then it sort of leads to a signing that isn't able to get the best out of themselves for the new club. Now, keep tuned for a bonus mistake that clubs are making when they attempt to sign or scout a player, and it could be the worst of them all. Now, we've talked about the style of play of the club that the player is moving to, but it's just as important for the scouting department to understand the club that he's moving from. And this leads me to the third sort of mistake that clubs are making when they attempt to scout or sign a player, which is sort of a poor assessment of the role the player played at their previous club. And just within that, you have to understand, what are the sort of tactical instructions that they may be following that can be moldable once they reach your club. Are they doing something that seems to be a mistake, but maybe they're being exposed by the team structure that seems to be quite poor, which also links back to the manager point. They could be playing for a manager that probably their strength isn't the defensive side of the game. So once they play for a manager that does have sort of a level of tactical acumen or knowledge about the defensive side of the game and knows how they want to set up their team, they could thrive in a more structured environment. So how does that look like as a real life example? Liverpool have been great at player recruitment over the past few years, and two that stand out are Jorginho Wijnaldum and Andrew Robertson. Both signed from relegated clubs, one of them being my own, Newcastle. And you could see from both players that they had a key strength that fit the style of play of Liverpool, but they came from a club where maybe they were being exposed in certain areas or even had a few weaknesses that, weren't great for the club at the time, but could be worked on. But we'll stick to sort of tactical elements at the moment. Jorginho Wijnaldum was a great player for Newcastle in terms of their attacking output, but he was played as a number 10 at times, maybe didn't have the defensive structure around him or, the level of tactical sort of structure that could help him thrive in a team. And so maybe he didn't look like he was a great defender off the ball. But as soon as he moved to Liverpool, where there's more of a workman-like midfield, they trust his ability on the ball, his ability to take the ball in tight spaces, make deep runs, late runs into the box and score goals. They saw a role for him on the left side of that central three that could work out. And with some coaching, he could show the defensive side of the game was more related to Newcastle as a team structure rather than him as a player. And it's the same for Andrew Robertson, who was bought from Hull. And it's a great quote from Ian Graham that I read recently, who was the director of research at Liverpool from around 2012. And I'll read a quote from what he said. He said, "Robertson had been part of the worst defensive team in the league. We recommended him as a really good attacking fullback, but we weren't certain about his qualities as a defender. Jurgen solved that by saying he wanted his fullbacks to attack, and if there were defensive weaknesses, we could solve that elsewhere with cover from midfield positions." So this is sort of the kind of thing that I'm talking about in terms of you can't just judge a player by what they're doing at their current club. You might see a part of your team that can fix a weakness that the player has and actually highlight the strength that they have at the same time. And that leads me to the impact of data. and especially around off-ball statistics, which I'll sort of explore in my next few videos. But I don't know how reliable they are as a metric for sort of rating a player off the ball without watching the player. You know, a lot of clubs can maybe analyze the on-ball side of things from a data metrics perspective and gain a good idea of how sort of that player plays, or sort of the risk profile of the passer or quality of the passing. But when it comes to off-ball defending, I believe you need to actually watch the player and see what they've been told to do, and see what the structure of the team they're coming from looks like. Now, there's so many other factors that could impact the success of a player that is being signed by a club, and whether they will turn out to be a good signing or a bad signing, such as the medical history, you know, are they prone to injury, transfer value and the pressure and the weight of that, the lifestyle the player leads, you know, how professional are they, the character of the player, the adaptation to sort of the new league, that could have a big influence on whether they work out or not. But I'm going to focus on, or I have focused on, you know, the key traits that a scouting department can sort of analyze and drill down to the details. You know, if you have a manager that knows their own style of play, knows how the player is going to fit into that and the exact player role that they will play, and know how to cover up some of the weaknesses that the player showed and highlight the strengths that the player showed at their previous club, then you're on the right road for a signing that will work out at your new club. This leads me on to the sort of bonus mistake that clubs are making, which is an over-reliance on the data. Now, it's not just the over-reliance on data, it's the misuse of data as well. But I'll come on to this on the next video that you see. And from there, we've come to the end of the video and the first ever video of A Game of Two Halves. Hope to see you again. Like, comment, subscribe, and next time we'll be delving into the world of data analytics. So see you soon.